question answer mode, and later on we'll open the platform so that directly people can ask you the questions. Right. So today we have Adarsh Kumar with us. Adarsh, known to us from the time we work in Rajasthan, when he was the task team leader for the World Bank mission for Rajasthan Rural Livelihood project, taken care by the Rajivika, Rajasthan Rural Livelihood Mission, Government of Rajasthan. So right now, Adarsh is working as Senior Strategy and Operations Officer at the World Bank, and he has been engaged in poverty eradication projects and mainly looking into agribusiness and rural entrepreneurship, MSME, in those sectors. So welcome others. So let me just putting the context that no, in a development in practice is a web series that we have started where we've been calling the change maker, the field leaders, the bureaucrats. So they can come up with their experience, expertise, and knowledge, and that can be shared with all the youngsters, youth, young professionals, and no, all the professionals who have been engaged in the development sector. So things can be done in a better way in future. So today's topic that we are discussing is more about livelihood and rural entrepreneurship, very specific to agribusiness and food processing. So as we have been discussing this has been an exciting sector working in agribusiness because no, there's been a agriculture majority country, and we are into rural entrepreneurship promotion, whether it is a through self-help or through farmer producer organization or through skill building or through MSME. We have been engaged into this sector in a different way. Different models have been facilitated by the government. So despite losses of jobs, people have been again doing a reverse migration from urban to rural, and people have been talking that okay, Mahatma Gandhi Narega can be a platform where people can be provided a substantial income, not use that can change the life, but at a substantial income can be provided. And but what is your initial expression when we say livelihood and rural entrepreneurship? Because this pandemic has changed many definitions. This has been changed the way we used to see livelihood, or the way we used to perceive entrepreneurship. So I just may request you to provide your initial expression to the current context with relation to livelihood and rural entrepreneurship. Others.
Yeah, thanks. Um, uh, I'm going to take about 5 minutes to, just set the context and sort of, I'm assuming that most of you are either working in the development sector or are interested in working in the development sector and are broadly knowledgeable about sort of, some of the core issues around livelihoods and so on. I think it's actually critical to define what we mean. What I'm going to do is talk about some of the evidence and best principles on some of the evidence and best principles on enterprise promotion, and specifically use an example of looking of the food processing sector in India to kind of illustrate some of these principles. So I think, as Srikant said, that this livelihoods and enterprise promotion is a big sort of focus area in India. There are a lot of programs, both public and civil society, that are looking at interventions in this area. I think it's really important to sort of these programs sort of tend to lead by looking at what can be provided directly to enterprises. Even when we look at rural areas, we look at selecting and bringing in a set of enterprises or entrepreneurs and then providing them certain services through donor or publicly financed interventions. And I think we really need to look at moving away from that sort of model to bringing in some of the evidence on how to scale up enterprise promotion efforts. So first, the food processing sector and agribusiness itself in India, I think, is a sort of sector with tremendous potential. If we are looking at rural, we can't not look at food processing and agribusiness as one of the major areas. We have about almost 2.5 million small and micro enterprises in the sector already operating, which makes up about 98% of all firms in the sector. That means only 2% are not informal or micro enterprises and would fall above that. And it employs about 5.5 million people. It makes up about 13% of industrial the industrial output in India. So it's sort of huge, and it has been growing overall. If you look at growth rates, you see growth rates of 5 to 8% over the last decade, but that's still not keeping up to the potential, and it can grow a lot faster. There are a lot of enabling conditions overall. If you look at it as a macro sector. India has low wage rates, a very abundant and diverse set of raw materials in terms of agricultural commodities across different regions. We have a big domestic market for demand for these kinds of processed foods and so on. And if you look at global comparisons, we are only at about 10% of food is processed. If you look at perishables, it's even lower, it's 2%. And if you look at some comparator countries like say East Asia or Latin America, that proportion is around 30%, right? So we have a much longer way to go to reach those kinds of comparison levels, and that's a good opportunity. But 3 or 4 principles sort of, as people who are either designing or working as part of enterprise promotion programs, these principles from global evidence sort of I'll go over. Sort of one is the most effective impact on business growth is not direct provision of services, it's creating a supportive ecosystem. So things, ease of doing business type indicators, such as ease of, infrastructure, transportation costs, power, service land, these are sort of huge enabling conditions. And any enterprise support program that does not look at improving these dynamics, direct interventions are not going to be successful. And this is something particularly to be kept in mind when we work in rural areas, right? I mean, we first need to look at, are there infrastructural constraints? Are there transportation constraints? Is there availability of power, and so on? Because these cannot be, if these things are missing, it can't be fixed through directly working with firms in any particular region. I think the second issue I'd like to flag, a principle, is targeting. I think here you need to be very clear when we say enterprise, what do we mean? Because we have a tendency to conflate self-employment and subsistence work as entrepreneurship. If you look at food processing sector, the NSSO data shows that out of this 2.5 million, about half are what would be called there's 2 categories. One is called establishment enterprises, which means these are enterprises that have a fixed place of business and employ non-family labor. And then there's something called own account enterprises, which means that it employs no non-family labor and has no fixed place of business. So this is sort of one data cut to look at the, look at targeting. But the point is, if I'm an individual self-employed person, entrepreneurship type interventions may not be of benefit to me. They may be different types of interventions like skill building or direct cash transfer to support that are needed, and enterprise sort of business growth type of technical services and so on. Most probably cannot be absorbed by this pool of businesses. So, clearly sort of demarcating, targeting, finding firms that can actually absorb inputs and grow. I think that's a very important sort of step in process. Third principle is around provision of technical services. How do we provide quality technical services? And here, this is the single most important part, evidence from globally across enterprise promotion programs, and that this is the, one of the most, the correlation to success in terms of enterprise growth. And here the issue is, how when we looked at food processing, for example, there were 4 different types of technical services we identified. So where firms needed to improve. One was food safety and product quality. Second was general business management. This could be business plans, commercial loan applications, accounting, finance, these kinds of things. And the third was sort of market access. So in these 3 areas, how could we bring quality technical services to enterprises? And again, here, one of the key findings is that how can, if we need to move towards market provision of services, so not relying on donor financed provision through a set of people where we get NGOs or service providers to come in, but how do you provide an incentive where there's a market of quality technical providers and the firm is directly reaching out to these providers, and the public intervention is around building that ecosystem, which may be training and accrediting the service providers or providing vouchers to enterprises that, to defray the costs of accessing these enterprises. The fourth point, and just one more and I'll stop. The fourth point is about credit. I think a very common sort of issue we see in India is thinking that credit is the leading problem, whereas it's actually a lagging problem, meaning that there are certain sort of technical inputs that a firm needs to build capability to be able to access credit, rather than starting with giving credit to firms as the key problem. And here again, we need to look at ecosystem sort of issues, right? So what we found works globally in terms of scale is looking, first that firms need technical service provision to develop a business plan and a commercial loan application. But on the, India has such an advanced supply side architecture compared to a lot of developing countries on the finance side. So things like partnerships with financial institutions, lowering cost of risk assessment, these are the kinds of things that we find that can have impact at scale. And last point is about inclusion. So here, sort of, we find across different tiers of enterprises, there's underrepresentation of women, and there are various specific obstacles to women-owned and managed enterprises sort of growing. There are obstacles to mobility that prevent access, that constrain access to outside markets, that reduce their networks, and then there are issues around time where the management of time with housework and so on. So technical service provision and programs need to take those obstacles into account and be flexible. So really, I think, that what the initial sort of framing, what I'm trying to say is that we really need to move away from thinking about direct services to firms, which is only, the evidence shows, one part of successful enterprise promotion, and very much need to look at what is the ecosystem building that is needed to enable these enterprises to grow. So I'll stop there, Shrikant, and open for discussions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Adarsh, for the initial insights. That's a lot of subject and thoughts. And the good thing that we have been thinking while we were speaking, that we are so much concentrate on the point that direct intervention with the firms, but we hardly look into the periphery, the other inputs, other sectors that has been an integral part of this firm's promotion. That has been a case. And okay, thank you for that. So let me open the session for a discussion. I have a couple of questions, some from this discussion, some I have already received. So now the first question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, others. Yes, the first question that I wish to raise. No, uh, we we have been working. You just mentioned that no about the role of women and women's participation in this entrepreneurship promotion and all. So we have been seeing the state rural livelihood missions that has been one of the change agents or the change agents are ground. They have not been working as a traditional government departments, and they have been working very differently with the idea of community resource persons and communitization. All those ideas has been engaged to that. So in this case, I just wish to know what all this SRLMs has to do first after this pandemic, because things have changed. We cannot see the way we used to see the way SRLMs used to function. So what do you think? What SRLMs has to first do to enhance the women's participation and make the women as a uh, put women at the driver's seat while thinking about promoting rural entrepreneurship and specific to agribusiness and food processing?
So I think 2 points. I think it's very important to separate between emergency response due to COVID issues and what are structural gaps and issues that need to be addressed. The structural gaps and issues do not change, just because of the COVID crisis, and the longer term plan, medium to longer term, this kind of intervention framework needs to be built up, and here the role of the of bodies like SRLMs are important because they have the social capital to be able to within the large pool of women identify which are the pool, use the data from lending and so on to identify which are the tier of women entrepreneurs that can actually benefit from these interventions, and then play a sort of linking role. But again, sort of, how do you link them to some of these ecosystem and service providers, as we said? And one of the important things there is looking at aggregation. So we know that the economies of scale, in rural areas on issues like transportation and so on, are impediments to competitiveness and market access. So here is an area where organizations like SRLMs can play an important role. But on the emergency assistance, I would be, that requires a different, what is the problem there? That the problem is that there are certain livelihoods or enterprise activities that are ongoing, which have been affected due to this COVID circumstances, right? It may be sort of market demand collapsing. It may be, different issues in terms of not getting raw material supplies or whatever, some disruption in the economic activity. And I think there it's again very important to distinguish between what is self-employment and what is an enterprise. And for enterprises that are facing cash flow issues, for 6 months or 8 months, there sort of emergency assistance is needed, maybe emergency credit, enhancing the credit window, and so on. But in cases of self-employment and subsistence employment, so here I think it's and I'm making a broader point, not just on SRLs. Here, sort of looking at enterprise response is actually counterproductive. It's actually an individual social protection response that is needed, and the government is actually doing, really has sort of laid out a package of interventions that are focusing on the individual, right? Maybe direct cash transfer, maybe enhanced rations through the PDS to ensure that there's no food security disruptions. So how do we ensure that our target rural sort of poor families have access to these social protection programs and schemes? Would be a critical sort of path.
Yeah, thank you. As you said, no, when you spoke about this linking to social securities, you talk about PDS to ensure food security, and all this convergence with all the government schemes and line department is also important to promote an individual from a self-independent to become a rural entrepreneur. So there's every step is countable. So, basing on the same context, now everyone is talking about, suddenly everyone, the boom came out about Mahatma Gandhi Narega, how it is ensuring people food as well as ensuring individual livelihood to people, all these things happening. So, still, there are 250 plus activities can be taken up under the Mahatma Gandhi Narega, but somewhere do you think it is missing the idea of entrepreneurship? Because we have been talking that people have been coming and working under Mahatma Gandhi Narega, but do you think the Mahatma Gandhi Narega also has the potential to make a shift from you from a worker to an entrepreneur?
No, I don't think so. I think there's a lot of evidence that MG Narega has been very important in terms as a social protection program, as sort of providing employment, to people who need it. I think it would be counterproductive to look at entrepreneurship. Why do we need Manrega to do it? Like, why not? Again, right? Which of these areas that I laid out is it actually able to move the window? So I don't think that is its focus. It's a social protection program meant to provide a flow, for families that need employment. And I don't think we should dilute it by looking at enterprises, because enterprise promotion is a very specialized kind of technical service provision area, and there are other sort of there are other aspects that it successfully does, like, for example, the category B works, where it enhances the livelihood assets of marginalized communities through either their sort of livestock rearing or their helping farm leveling and so on. So I think that those kinds of livelihood activities, it can help strengthen livelihood assets. But I don't see any link with enterprise or enterprise promotion per se.
Yeah, thank you, Adarsh. Why we raise this question? Because we received a query that's saying that Mahatma Gandhi Narega is creating livelihood asset. So the person who received a land development activity, maybe in future from a worker move into cash crop, doing farmer, and later on selling that product in the market and become an entrepreneur. So that's how people also know, pretending that can be helpful. Yes.
That's like a 5-year program, right? Meaning, why? That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So that's a different intervention. If there are millions of people in rural areas who already have land but have not been able to shift to cash crops and do that, so I think that is why not focus on those through target interventions. But again, here I want to make a distinction. I think we conflate these words of livelihoods, enterprise promotion. I think these are very different words.
Exactly.
Helping
Exactly.
somebody buy 2 or 3 extra cows or animals, helping them manage the production of milk and sell into markets, that is not an enterprise promotion. That is a livelihoods activity. We are helping them enhance their livelihoods. That requires a very different type of intervention, where we are helping them form the producer companies so that economies of scale. You're helping them get supply into certain markets. So we really need to distinguish between these different terms and different types of interventions.
Yeah, thank you, Aziz. As the next question that we are receiving, that there is a query coming, and they are saying the participation of rural youth or the interest of rural youth to be a rural entrepreneur or entrepreneur in who own village or GP or gram panchayat or block or district has been reducing. So there has been an idea from our education system that it is easy to take up a job and move rather than take up an entrepreneurship struggle for initial years and sustain your enterprise. So where it need a fundamental structural change, at least in the psychology or the mental strength of a youth while growing up in schools or education.
I actually sort of agree with that view, Shrikanta, because one same point, right?
Idea of complete the schooling and move into a job.
Yeah, go
And this
ahead.
question, yeah, sorry. Yeah. So this question came because they have been saying that there is a huge urban job loss. When people with a good qualification, they are also going out of job and they are coming back, and there are evident in Chhattisgarh or Jharkhand where they're coming and they are taking up farming or animal husbandry or poultry activities from last 2 to 3 months. So in that context, people have been asking, so what structural change we need in our education practices so that you should be confident to take up enterprise as a future opportunity rather than creating that idea of completing school and move into a job, government or private job.
I think there are two issues here. Sort of one is, are there changes in the educational system that can help expose people to ideas of entrepreneurship, so that and change the so that they consider those avenues. Yes, I think in our educational system we can introduce more, both in terms of curriculum, bringing in sort of examples, case studies of rural enterprises, and even within our if you look at rural livelihoods, we have so many successful models of, say, poultry enterprises or scaling up livestock sort of enterprises, moving from just backyard, backshed kind of poultry to more of a commercial oriented poultry rearing that links to to formal corporate buyers. So I think sort of exposure, bringing in those models of case studies in the educational system, both at the higher school level and at college level, is important. But again, the second part of that story, we still need to understand the difference between what is called subsistence entrepreneurship or what is called push entrepreneurship, right? That I am an entrepreneur, which is actually a form of underemployment because I can't get a job. Therefore, I'm working in, I start, some kind of small enterprise, which actually doesn't even pay for the cost of my labor, right? If you look at rural kirana shops, in many cases, you see that this is the case, right? If you look at what is actually, it's just a, if you look at the returns from those, that those are very low. And where we see what is called pull entrepreneurship, it's typically in places where somebody has gained the skill and experience. So I have worked in the construction sector for 5 years, and I know that, okay, here I can use those skills and experience to move from being a worker to a contractor or a material supplier or to somebody higher up the chain. And I think there is no substitute for that kind of work experience in a particular sector before moving into entrepreneurship in that sector. And I think we know from global evidence that this concept stage enterprises, people who, for any donor supported programs to support concept stage enterprises, the success rate is very low. It'll be in the 5 to 7%. Right. Yes. So we need to keep these these two separate issues in mind, right? One is, yes, these are what the things that can be done in terms of exposure, both to case studies as well as exposing them to entrepreneurs, bringing them in and having talks and so on to expose people. But second, we have to be careful that we shouldn't think that somebody coming out of school or college can become an entrepreneur. That's just, not shown to be the case.
Yes, thank you. The next question, that one question is coming, that when we are talking about entrepreneurship and promoting the enterprises and making them very visible to the open market, right? The produce can be linked into the open market and everything. So one example they are putting is that NEML, or there is a ENAM, National Agriculture Market. So there are data after ENAM has been introduced, but it is less than 5% of the total volume that has been traded agricultural produce is only taking the digital platform. You got it? Hello.
Yeah.
So out of total volume that we have been trading in India, the agricultural produce, only less than 5% is traded in ENAM or digital platform. So what changes you think? Is it that farmers is unaware of all these things, or do you think the APMC type of things are still creating issues for farmer, or this is the middleman who already captured not allowing the farmer to have access, or from the government side or from the agency side, we fail to reach the farmer and saying that this is the existing platform, you can also come and join? What do you think? It is less than 5% is only digitalized no agribusiness that has been happening, the produce that has been traded in India.
Uh, we have to cross check those numbers. I'm not sure, but and so I don't know about the actual volume. But few points here. One, it is a major shift to move towards a national market, right? And I think there are lots of enabling conditions that are needed to enable more farmers and traders to access. And I think there have been a lot of positive steps in that direction. Both in terms of the new or the updated Model APMC Act, the recent ordinances sort of giving more push to market reforms outside APMCs, allowing trade, including digital trade, and this push towards sort of bringing farmers sort of together into FPOs, right? These are some of the enabling conditions, right? One, that as a buyer, how do I need to be confident of the quality of produce that is, if I'm digitally trading, I need to be confident about the quality of produce. So what is the ecosystem in place to ensure that, right? The assaying services, quality check services, quality control services. Again, we need to look at developing an ecosystem of private provision of these kinds of services, right? That I can get my produce checked by an independent authority, and that certificate gives the confidence to anyone anywhere in India or globally to buy digitally through an online platform. The second is scale is an issue, as small farmers cannot directly trade sort of in digital markets. So how, again, here aggregation becomes an important sort of facilitating service that can be done either as private sector aggregators sort of bringing it, or through FPOs and provision. And third is around, again, a set of ecosystem services will come up, right? Meaning, if you look at the stock exchange, then you have finance sort of coming in to finance sale and purchase of things that are going on. So these are all sort of, ecosystem things that need to be done, but it's a big shift from earlier to move towards a national market. And now, the focus needs to be on these enabling factors to enhance the scale going forward of trading on the online platform.
Right, thank you. Next question that we have received is, mainly others people have been talking about the credit, and you also mentioned as your the fifth point during your initial expression to the topic, credit, farmer credit linkage is the key. But still we are saying that the BLBSC or the block level bankers committee or the district level bankers committee, there has been a huge loss of any coordination. The bankers has been issuing policies, guidelines has been coming up, priority lending schemes have been changed, but somewhere the understanding of the bankers never changed at the ground, and that has been creating a huge issue while ensuring these enterprises or linking them with a formal credit. So do you suggest any proper model that can be community managed or something, or to create a such a pressure, community level pressure on the local financial institution? Because we also have to understand the condition of this bank at ground. There are banks, if you go to RRB, that is 1+1 mandate persons working, one manager, one clerk. So they are also equipped with so many things. Again, they have to provide other government schemes, like either it is an AIACA payment or social pension scheme payment, whatever they have to also do the government delivery activities, welfare activities. So in this context, how you ensure, or is there any model that you suggest to ensure that this rural entrepreneurs can be linked to a proper financial institution for proper credit assessment, credit linkages, repayments, all those things can be done as a package for them? Because we have been talking about credit, but we are not that success at ground.
again, specifically in food processing, we looked at it a lot. So in the aggregate, there is a problem, right? As I said, 98% of food processing enterprises are micro and informal. But when we looked at the data, only 3% of the volume of credit going to the sector of formal credit is going to those 98%. So there is a big mismatch, and we need to look at issues, right? But again, when we looked at individual enterprises, credit was not the leading constraint. We talked to banks. There are various government, as you mentioned, promotional schemes to actually get money to incentivize lending to these entrepreneurs and enterprises, right? But so why isn't it working? So two or three issues. One, it needs to start with building the capability of firms. So there are competitiveness issues at the firm level, at the enterprise level, that needs to be addressed first. Because what bankers say is that give us a bankable proposal and we'll finance it. That's a business. In fact, we have pressure to finance because of mandates in the for public sector banks. For there's such excess liquidity in the system at the moment, for example, right? That people are parking money with RBI. Banks are parking money with RBI because they're not being able to lend. So the issue is to need to look at it slightly differently. Is that first, the leading problem is how do you enhance the competitiveness of enterprises, which means enhancing firm capability, linking them to markets, and then sort of look at a set of credit access measures. And here again, the big scaling up things that can be done, sort of one is looking at lowering the cost of risk assessment. So can interventions look at models of credit ratings of enterprises that use non-traditional methods, because a lot of these micro and small may not have organized records going back to enable a credit rating. The second is hand-holding. Can technical sort of service providers help them develop a business plan and a commercial loan application, and actually do a hand-holding service with linking them to the institutions. And the third is lowering the cost of actually providing the loans for financial institutions through looking at one of the ways is, can we look at geographic clusters, developing a pipeline of firms in a particular geographic cluster, where we if we can bring 1,000 firms in food processing to where initial work and screening is done through donor interventions, and you're able to sort of give a pool of firms a pipeline to banks, then that's one way to lower the costs of banks of servicing in a particular region. And lastly, really we can help build the capacity of financial service providers in being able to make risk assessments. So in food processing, for example, we looked at partnering with banks and collecting data on large numbers of food processing enterprises. So say dairying, we pick 10,000 dairying small enterprises and say that, okay, these are the factors, here's the distribution. So when you get a loan application, you can compare against this distribution and immediately be able to tell, okay, is this a viable enterprise or not? Because we've already done the data collection and identified 3 or 4 factors that they can compare that loan application against. So I think these are 3 or 4 of the areas. Again, there's a tendency to be very supply-led, that somehow if we give money to the entrepreneur, that's all that's needed. But actually, I think that comes last, and a lot of this technical capacity interventions are needed first.
Thank you, Adarsh. Thank you. So I have a couple of questions, but in between, let me ask the participants also. If they have any question, they can unmute their speaker, or they can raise their hand. They can directly ask the question to others. If they have any question, they can directly ask, or we'll move ahead with our other questions. You can mark your hand raised, and then we can unmute you. You can directly ask the question if you have any. This Manohar is asking something. Manohar, we have unmute you.
Hi, others. Good afternoon. My question is that when you talk about that, these small entrepreneurship still, need that skill to have a bankable project. So, what do you think that government need a policy level change to upgrade those idea to skill and then as a as a bankable product? So, as a policy level, what do you think that we still have to have that kind of policy to facilitate those small enterprise to really reboost the rural economy or enterprise as a large?
Thanks. That's a good question. I think really where we see the role for public interventions is creating and incentivizing, so creating an ecosystem for market-driven provision of these technical services at a particular quality, and incentivizing use of these services by the firm. So what do I mean by that? So things like standard setting, training of trainers, accreditation of nodal institutions that can train, accreditation of consultants and consulting firms and technical service providers. So you're ensuring minimum quality standards of these kinds of services. And the second part is on actually defraying the costs of firms using these. We find globally that small businesses tend to not have the wherewithal to pay for these services, or not have the culture of paying for these services. And it's something that needs to be built up as a behavior. So here, sort of, voucher programs, for example, that giving vouchers that can be redeemed with for use of accredited technical service providers, so that the firm gets used to paying for it, right? It's not completely sort of donor driven, but that it defrays part of the cost of doing it. So these are two areas where globally public programs have shown success in enhancing access to quality technical services for small and informal firms.
Yeah,
Right.
just I was adding that. Do we have as a national level? For example, we had a skill development program, but somehow that we not able to reach is that that rural part or enterprise part. It just upgrade the skill, and that somehow we are not able to as succeed at we vision. So what do you think that how can still we need different, for example, either the program or the voucher, or where do you still think that we are lacking at a policy level?
So I don't think we are really lacking policy. We have a very strong policy regime. I think, so again, I would separate out, right? I think skills training program is slightly different, and it fits in a different way into this ecosystem. So when we say skills training program, do we mean skills training program for workers who will work in enterprises? Do we mean skills training programs for entrepreneurs who are running enterprises? Those are two very different things. And that becomes only one part of the overall ecosystem of services that are needed. At a policy level, we have really great policies. The only change broadly, I would say, that we need to look at is at the policy level also. Do we have enough of a focus on creating an ecosystem that is promoting market provision of services rather than direct provision through public institutions? Because if our policy and program is saying, okay, only through the scheme, the SRLM is going to provide these services, then there's a natural scale issue, right? How many enterprises can one public institution or public institution support. But if you're trying to create an ecosystem, and if a 2 lakh qualified technical service providers are providing services directly to firms, then the scale of firms that can receive those services are at a very different level. So I think that is one policy area that really sort of we do need to look at. How do we move from direct provision to looking at ecosystem, promoting an ecosystem where the public sector plays a role of being the regulator rather than the provider of certain services.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Adarsh. Adarsh, just carry forward the same question what Manohar just raised the thing. Yes. 1 second. Yes. Others, just carrying forward the same question what Manohar just said, just adding some point to that. You told about the scale. So we have also seen the many enterprises, mainly the farmer producer companies and organizations. They have been struggling to get a scale of produce to compete with the local market. That we have seen in Rajasthan, that we also seen in Orissa and other parts of that. Right. So in such cases, that do you think that, as you said, the government public sector can be a regulator instead of any service provider, but when there is a problem of scaling, because most of the FPOs are fighting for that, getting that scale, and because they don't have a market share to influence the price or influence the market mechanism at least at the local level, even in mandis. So what the role of the government in that point, what the role of the public sector in such situations?
Yeah, so here there is, right? But again, I want to ask a counter question. So yes, so there is a role, right? So if you want to promote farmer producer organizations, then you need to, there is a role, right? That's a role where the public sector needs to come in, because it's not an area where somebody on their own is going to go and create, right? Other than at small scale, some NGOs might do it. So there, but I want to ask you, to think about what are the different mechanisms through which the public sector can incentivize that. So one is through the traditional method, where within a livelihoods agency, you hire staff and you place them in a cluster and tell them to sort of promote FPOs, right? But are there other methods? I mean, can we pilot and look at other methods? For example, doing a challenge fund, saying that, okay, if a lead farmer or farmers in a region or farmer leaders or community leaders play that role and put together the following, we'll provide the following incentives, based on certain milestones, right? So there may be many different ways for how the public sector can incentivize that, and I think we need to look at that. But otherwise, yes, I think FPO creation is an area where the public sector needs to play a role. But again, think about what are the different ways in which it can play that role. Does it do it directly? Does it create some kind of challenge system that enables a broader set of players to go do some of those activities? And we know from experience, because again, we know the success rate here has been not very high, right? If we look at the FPO promotion space so far.
Yes. Look, just a point that no, it's not only about the promotion. When we are also when we are also promoting, we are also struggling with the creating that marketing that produce. So there we actually facing the problem, and that has been because the government has recently come up with APMC amendments, where now they are also allowing, other than the farmer can directly sell it to retailers. So such type of intervention may help. Some policy changes may help. Otherwise, somewhere from far from a small village, the farmer has to come to mandi, get a mandi license, get bullied by the agents, and has to sell his produce at a lower rate. But recently, the government has come up with some relaxation, and now the farmer can directly sell his produce to anyone. So that type of policy changes can be done to support the FPOs or farmers. So let me others just unmute Purari Sharma. He has some question.
So, but I have again a
Purari?
point on this issue.
Yes,
Sikandar.
yes, sir.
Is the issue that is it a policy issue, or is the issue that the margins of joining together as an FPO and selling to the market directly, do those margins support the costs of ongoing running of the FPOs? I mean, I
Yes.
think that is the problem I've seen in most cases, right? That
Yes,
it may
yes, I
not be a
agree.
policy issue.
Yes.
And that just shows that, we need to start from the business case and the market side. Rather,
Yeah.
we tend to start on the FPO side saying, okay, let's make an FPO in this area because there are farming problems and there are, we need to intervene here. But,
Exactly.
that I've not seen sort of working, because this is the issue. It needs ongoing financing support to make it never becomes viable, because the margins you're able to realize never cover the operating costs of the FPO.
Yes. In such case, I have just adding to your point. This is recently the government of India has a vision to create form 10,000 FPOs, and they've recently published an office letter, and they made NABARD, CDCS, and SFSC as an agency for supporting and promoting. So I was also thinking, and that the policy also read the guidelines for promoting 10,000 FPOs says that you can have a FPO with 1,000 members, 500 to 1,000 members. But even with 3,000 member, I have my own experience. They have been struggling to create any profit margin at field. So there I was saying, whether are we just putting it as a formation of FPO with number registration is, because most of the FPOs, the idea is to know you form with 1,000, collect some share money, get it registered. But by the end of first year, if you withdraw your support and everything, they get into a silent mode. So that is that is actually what is happening at fee right now. Yes. Yeah. Going ahead, let me Puran, I have unmute you. Please raise your question.
Hello, sir. Good evening. This is Purari Kumar from working in OLM, sir, as a YP. Sir, as you rightly said in your previous question, that this skill training and this promoting entrepreneurship is both are different things. Sir, my question is that if like government is promoting this entrepreneurship through the different schemes like SVP, Startup Village Enterprise Program. For the namesake of this SPP, sir, government is promoting just like a kirana shop and kind of thing. Do you think, sir, this is a kind of thing where we are promoting this entrepreneurship environment? This is first question. And second question is, sir, like we have an ideal example in Gujarat, like Amul has promoted their milk selling program, through which this whole in our whole country milk revolution came, and more or less many people engaged into this, and it is a kind of enterprise for many of the people. They just opened it and started it. Don't we think, sir, government should come up with this kind of substantial thing where people have already a set of things where they can run their enterprises? Or for just the namesake we can bring some schemes or many things on the paper only?
So two things, sort of. One, no, I don't think that kirana shop is an enterprise activity. I think
Exactly.
at most, when we go, even in Rajasthan, we were, if you look at how many kirana shops can actually be viable in a village. So I think, okay, so one can be an enterprise or two can be an enterprise. But, beyond that, it's just a form of sort of underemployment, right? Because you just don't make the margins to even pay for your own labor, to look at, if you index against Manrega minimum wages, that are you at least making that much? I don't think that is the case. On the second issue, yes. So that is an area, so again, I would separate out, right? That's not an enterprise activity. It's a livelihood activity. Dairying, right? That you're able to, there's been through public sector intervention, you've created a value chain which enables people to earn, to enhance their income through dairying activities, right? Through this whole NDDB model. So should those things be done in other places? Absolutely. And it's not as if it hasn't been tried. I mean, it's been tried in horticulture, right? Mother Dairy tried similar method, NDDB model for fruits and vegetables, but wasn't able to be successful because of the dynamics of that business. But there are various on those kinds of livelihood activities, there are very specific public interventions that can enhance the returns to farmers, right? But again, I wouldn't call it enterprises. It's not enterprise activity. It's a livelihood kind of household income activity. But what are those, right? Just within dairying, look at that model, right? What were the specific interventions that were done, and not just the cooperatives, right? There were artificial insemination, there was animal health services, there was a whole kind of food testing, the milk testing kind of technology that came in at different places, and these were all kind of discrete interventions. And the cooperative model was a way to sort of sort of the scale and aggregation issue sort of it addressed very well. But these discrete sort of interventions can be looked at and are being looked at in other sectors like fruits and vegetables, right? Can we bring in new varieties that are have lower cost, more hardier? Can we provide technical support services to farmers that sort of lower usage of inputs and usage of inputs more efficiently? Can we look at helping them meet food quality and safety standards so that they can sell their produce to organized retailers? So some of these can be done even independently of organizing them into a collective. But of course, in the long run, the collective really strengthens because the economies of scale come in. So I would say sort of, look at discrete interventions as well that improve the terms of trade, on these activities. That's definitely things that can be looked at and is being looked at in different areas, in different livelihoods areas.
Thank you, Others, just to going back to the 10,000 FPO, I've been text to ask you this question. Do you think this is realistic idea promoting 10,000 FPOs? How reliable it is? Because there is already 4,000 plus.
There's no issue.
Yes, 10,000. Let me read the question.
Yeah.
Let me read the question. Okay, they are saying there is already 4,000 plus FPOs registered as per the NAVA data in various agencies, and hardly 30% of them are able to make them fill their administrative cost for the year. So, do this idea of 10,000 FPOs promotion is a realistic? Yes, Others.
It can't tell because look, as a total number, what is it? Such a small number. Why not? Why can't you do it? I mean, it'll be a small proportion of farmers in India, even 10,000, right? So issue is on implementation modalities and implementation capacity, not in terms of the number. And I think if that's what the question is referring to, yes, so a lot of effort needs to be put in on how will you actually promote these, because it's very important. We know from experience of the 4,000 that are already there, that a very small proportion are actually commercially viable and have managed to, right? And we also know from experience that FPO promotion is a very intensive task that you need to, have really well-trained technical staff providing inputs over a significant period of time, like 3 years minimum, right? So it's about the implementation modalities and how we get it right. The number itself, why not? I mean, we think about it of how many FPOs you could actually do if given the scale of India. But how do we build out the implementation modalities? How do we sort of do, provide that kind of technical services required? That is a challenge and that needs a lot of focus.
Right, Others. Thanks for this. And with this, Others, I think I have anyone have any other question? Because I have received so many questions. I just try to cluster them into one simple groups and put it forward. So anyone still have any question? Kindly raise. Yeah. If there is no question, then we will move ahead. Yes, right. I got a WhatsApp to my I get a question to my WhatsApp. Others, there is the last question. We'll take this question, and this is like that. No, everyone is right now talking about migration and the migrants who have returned. So, do you think any space for them to take up rural entrepreneurship, and how the government can ensure that inclusive of them into rural entrepreneurship? Look, I understand entrepreneurship, nothing that you can make it in a day or two, but still others, your views on that.
Yeah, there may be spaces, right? So again, it's filtering and targeting that is required. So a lot of these people would have people with significant work experience in specific areas, right? I mean, they may be people who worked in factories, maybe people who worked in different sort of technical areas like textiles, food processing, and so on. So I think there is an opportunity if we can look at, providing them the opportunity to start rural enterprises of people who have actually have the technical expertise to do so. So one would be targeting and filtering that, that you make programs that actually target people who have the technical capability, right? You put some criteria, entry criteria into the program. And again, here, sort of think about different types of what might be really transformative, right? So for example, so many migrants have gone back to Bihar. Can we look at industrial parks in rural Bihar, which is giving space to a serviced sort of land for small enterprises in particular pockets of Bihar, right? Those are the kinds of ecosystem investments. And then you use those industrial parks to provide some targeted technical services and so on, right? So again, my point is we need to think a little differently. So it's not about general sort of provision of subsidized money or something that would be the main driver. It will be some of these sort of ecosystem things that we can really help, right? And it's something to think about. I always look at why is it that all the labor in factories in all these major industrial clusters, whether it's outside Delhi, whether it's Bombay, whether it's Gujarat, come from states like Odisha and Bihar. But why aren't businesses getting set up there and growing? And it's because if there is cheap labor available and abundant labor, that's what you would expect. So even in the crisis, that's what we need to focus on. Like, what can we do to actually get businesses to set up there, including migrants who are potential entrepreneurs who come back in these areas, like rural Bihar, like rural Odisha, and so on.
Thank you very much, others. And just adding to the point that you made, the filtration is required. And just a couple of months back, all the state governments were wondering about the migration data. So this COVID at least gave us the database for all the migrants. So that actually going to help us and do the skill mapping for them and ensure the way you creating rural parks in Bihar. So that can help, because right now we have a database of migrants. We can filter that. Even in Orissa, I'm seeing how we are mapping skill of this return migrants. So that really can help. One question, others. Let me take this one question. Who is this ready? There is something ready. We'll take this question. Sorry to others.
Sure.
Hello, sir. Hello,
Hi.
sir. Sir, this is Subhashish from Bhubaneswar, and I am from TISS, Tata Institute of Social Science. I work with Housing Urban Development Department, Odisha, so in sanitation and livelihood space. So recently, we group of TCNs came together and developed an application. So this was in the line that migrants are all coming back. We do not have a data. That's why there is a lot of difficulty in decision making. So the app named as Kutum, Kutumb, Kutum. So what's the idea? Idea is making a database, then act as a staffing company. So what we do that anybody that any person comes back, we will act as a linkage organization. Secondly, any resource mobilization is happening. Most of the time, the CSO civil society organizations find it difficult to target this group of people. So therefore, this will also act as an organization which will also help the donors or the philanthropists to target these groups. Secondly, it will act as an employment exchange for blue collar and brown collar workers. So at the ideation level, it is. Tell me how this idea will be.
It sounds like a great idea. I think, really these are the kinds of ecosystem things, right? Of trying to capture information and you can even, if you have local presence, you can build a database. You can look at partnering with established sort of job portals, and that already exist once you build that database locally. So I think it's a good idea. I think the challenge will be that demand may pick up only, after 8 months or so, 6 to 8 months, once this, COVID sort of restrictions start abating, right? So I think, you'll have to look at it as a medium term kind of thing. But if you do the back end work of building the database, getting the information, I think it's a great idea, right?
Thank you, Adarsh. So with this, we're closing down all the question answer sessions, Adarsh. So before we close down our session, Adarsh, may I request you to give your last expression, last thoughts after this discussion, where we are heading, what's the solution? May not be in a bigger sense, but in a brief that will help
No,
us.
I just reiterate these points that please keep in mind as professionals in the sector that one, separate out enterprise and entrepreneurship from livelihoods and subsistence work. I think it's critical. There's a big issue of conflating these issues. The kinds of interventions that are required for these three things are very different. For enterprise promotion, enterprises, define enterprises. And again, I point to, if you look at NSSO data, a good easy cut is this own account enterprises versus establishment enterprises. But even within those, sort of, how do you filter and identify people who can actually grow? Because it's actually a disservice to look at somebody who's not able, who's an individual and not an enterprise, and then try enterprise support interventions on them when they require sort of much more basic kinds of support. So I think that's a very big thing to keep in mind. And the second is this issue of ecosystem, right? Look, instead of directly what can I give, is to how do I build an ecosystem where the entrepreneur or enterprise is able to access what they need? Because if I build that kind of system, then much larger number of people, enterprises can benefit, rather than just one technical service provider or supporting 200 or 300 enterprises. So I'll stop there as closing remarks.
Yeah. Thank you, Adarsh. Thanks for joining us, and thank you for this valuable insights. And thanks to all the participants for their time that they joined us on this weekend. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Shrikanta. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.